Imagine, if you will, going to an ice cream shop. Upon arriving, you're greeted by the cool air and sweet aroma permeating the room. You go to the counter and see all the flavors for sale, and would you look at that? The shop has your favorite. You ask for a sample and it tastes heavenly. Of course, since that small bit was so good, you have to ask for more, so you fully commit and order a cup of your favorite flavor. The person behind the counter prepares your order and hands it over, but it's not quite what you asked for. At all. In fact, it's straight up dog shit. Like, literally shit. What gives, you think to yourself? The first bit was so good, so why is the whole thing just shit? Well, that would make anybody angry, wouldn't it? Let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5. When it starts, Arc 5 is a breath of fresh air. Compared to the slower-paced Zayal, which handles two halves in its airing in Zayal 1 and Zayal 2, the first season of Arc 5 goes at a rapid pace. What's that? You want a tournament arc? Boom, you got it. Throw in some new character introductions while we're at it. Also, we're doing Battle City again. But the best part about all of this? The quality rarely, if ever, falters. The writing for all the main characters is handled brilliantly through their development as they deal with the tournament and the multi-dimensional war. It always feels organic. Never once do any of Yugioh's reactions to the things going on around him feel forced or inauthentic. There's so much content to take in during the Miami Youth Championship, and none of it is ever boring to watch. All the new characters getting plenty of screen time, coupled with the suspense of seeing some of these same characters getting carted by Fusion Dimension foot soldiers, makes for an anime that's not only compelling, but plain fun. So by the end of it, when the survivors group up to form the Lancers, it seems like the fun is only beginning. Surely the next few seasons will be even crazier to watch and even better and... oh... So, what went wrong? Character obliteration, slow, dull pacing, maybe even a gross misuse of legacy characters in place of the new cast the show had to offer? Well, yeah. And it all goes back to the Synchro arc. But what was it about this arc that halted Arc 5's progress in its tracks? To be honest, most of this is the fault of the settings shifting as quickly as it does from Miami City to, City, or just City, I guess. In the standard dimension, pressure is being applied to the main cast as they duel in a tournament due to the threat of an incoming interdimensional war. In the Synchro dimension, however, all that momentum comes to a grinding halt as all the characters' developments are forcefully halted by some of the most insane writing decisions Yu-Gi-Oh's ever seen. Upon entering the Synchro dimension, each member of the newly founded Lancers is almost immediately split up into different groups. While we do get a few instances of each of the members developing as a unit by themselves during the prison arc and sometime before, the Lancers as a group had their potential obliterated come the Friendship Cup. In fact, most of the Synchro arc's problems lie in the Friendship Cup. But as for the Lancers, they get next to no time to develop further as a group after Reiji enters them in the Friendship Cup and are instead separated as far as possible from each other in locked rooms. While this may not sound too bad on paper, anyone who's watched the arc knows the issue I'm getting at here. The Friendship Cup takes way too long, to the point where it's kinda ridiculous. So, for about 30 episodes or so, everyone is just kinda separated from each other, and there's very little to no payoff for the viewer for sitting through all of this. But Noah Jenk, I hear you ask behind your monitor, why does Reiji even enter them in the Friendship Cup to begin with? I mean, the Lancers have more than enough dueling prowess on their own to overcome pretty much any obstacle together. See, I agree with this, but unfortunately, so did the writers. My theory is the writers knew how easily the Lancers could deal with the issues the Synchro arc gave them, and decided to intentionally split the group up to make things harder for them. So, once they're all united, it feels like we're finally getting somewhere with the story, but then it just stalls for a really, really long time. As for why Reiji enters the Lancers into the cup, I actually sorta understand that. Maintaining the trust of the council would, in theory, be a very important part of getting them on your side in the interdimensional war. The problem with this lies mainly in the awful handling of the tournament itself. Everything is drawn out to make some sort of artificial conflict between the Lancers and the citizens of the Synchro dimension. The show is trying its hardest to make the viewer care about the idea of social division between classes, but it just leaves the viewer confused, if anything. Why are we talking about this? Isn't there an interdimensional war going on? Isn't that more pressing of an issue? This confusion isn't helped at all by the fact that the arc is riddled with moments of absolute idiocy from almost all of the characters, like some sort of shit-writing minefield that the viewer has to unfortunately take seriously if they want to reach the end. Let's take a look at some of my personal favorites in a segment I like to call That's So Arc 5. The Council is in an agreement with Reiji that the interdimensional warfare would be trouble for their world. Due to this overwhelming agreement, they proceed to hold Reiji captive so that he can't escape and gain more information to attempt to stop the warfare that the Council fears. Reiji is held captive by both the Council and Roger's security for about half of the Synchro arc, being totally uninvolved with almost everything going on in the season. At the very end of the arc, he proceeds to walk out of captivity with little to no issue and single-handedly wipes out security's forces. Apparently, he could just do this the whole time, but chose not to at every other point in the arc, even when it would have been helpful. Cool! Shinji's whole character is about strength in numbers and overcoming oppression. It's because of this courageous, rebellious side of him that we see him directly tell Yuya that they cannot save Yuzu because it's just how the world is, as he proceeds to fight in the Friendship Cup that propagates the very same ideals that he exists to fight against. Crow, Shinji, and almost every other Commons resident are totally cool with believing Yuya was sponsored by Roger in the Friendship Cup, despite overwhelming evidence suggesting otherwise, and the only thing implicating this alliance being Roger's word. Of course, it makes perfect sense that the Commons would believe Roger so willingly since, they hate him so much. Conveniently, Sora's development in the first season of the show is immediately reset to 0 after he realizes that he does not like academia actually, and his hatred of Exi's duelists is never revisited. Oddly enough, it's Mr. Egao himself, Yuya Sakaki, who ends up speaking the most sense during this arc. His anger at some of the stupid things he hears, such as from Shinji, Sora, or like most Commons, is never unfounded, and yet the viewer is meant to take all this idiocy at face value and treat it like it matters, despite the incoming invasion of the Obelisk Force. The writing contradicts itself and creates confusion time and time again, but why does it happen so frequently? To understand that, we have to understand a little bit more about Arc 5's production. Arc 5's staff included main writer Tsutomu Kamishiro, a writer who up to this point had only worked as head writer on adaptations of pre-existing works, such as the 2011 adaptation of Hunter x Hunter. Kamishiro had never been the head of an original project on the scale of Arc 5 up to this point, so this was a brand new experience for him. We also saw the return of director Katsumi Ono, who previously worked as a series director for 5Ds. Though the two's vision for Arc 5 started strong, the quality of the show's writing seemed to deteriorate over time. This drop in quality was unfortunately exacerbated by the departure of talented scriptwriters like Go Zappa early on in the show's life, and as Arc 5 continued, the weaknesses in Kamishiro's writing and Ono's series direction became more and more apparent. But how exactly? There are a few reasons, not the least of which is the fact that Katsumi Ono was directing another anime at the same time of Arc 5's airing, that being Symphogear GX. And, as I mentioned before, Ono worked as a director for 5Ds, and though it's never been officially confirmed, fans across the globe have theorized for years that the reason the Synchro arc lasted for so long was due to preferential treatment from Ono. Something a little more concrete, however, is that Ono really enjoys repeating themes across his works. For example, there's a little anime that came out in 2020 called Hypnosis Mic Division Rap Battle Rhyme Anima, which was directed by Ono. One of the main themes of this show is social division and class warfare, two themes apparent in both Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds and Arc 5's Synchro arc. While there's nothing wrong with developing these ideas as central themes for your work, where the Synchro arc fails under Ono's direction is that it spends far too much time developing this concept while foregoing any pressing, larger issues. Let's take a look at the scene with Shinji I mentioned earlier as an example. Yuzu just got Spopoviched by Sergei, and Yuya intends to leave his post and go find her to help, only to get stopped in his tracks by Shinji, who gives this whole giant speech to Yuya about how social division is bad. It's like, yeah, no shit, but this is really not the time or place for that. While the pacing in the Synchro arc is demonstrably awful, it's moments of idiocy like this from characters that the viewer is forced to treat with some semblance of legitimacy that really put the cherry on top. Speaking of idiotic character writing, let's talk about Tsutomu Kamishiro. Like I mentioned before, Kamishiro had yet to be the head writer of an original series, all this point only working on adaptations. While working on Arc 5, it seems as though there was some sort of consistent miscommunication between Kamishiro and the script writers he worked with, as character development or concepts from one episode would often get reset in the very next episode. Take, for example, the Sergei versus Jack duel. The duel ends with Sergei essentially going out on his own terms in a heroic suicide. This seems to be a way to redeem Sergei's character, and it's a decently cool moment, but that only lasts for so long. The very next episode after the duel finishes includes a scene where we discover that actually Sergei lived, only for his weak body to be viciously beaten by the growing Commons rebellion in a scene that seems to paint the Commons as a mindless army that only wants to fight and destroy. So, Sergei actually lived, and the Commons are bad now because of their violent tendencies, I guess? Would you be surprised if I told you that Kamishiro wrote this episode? Because Kamishiro wrote this episode. Kamishiro seemed to be writing a totally different show than the rest of the scriptwriters. His episodes were, on average, much darker and tended to cancel out character development back to his vision while ignoring previous developments. This would explain the contradictory and annoying writing in the Synchro arc, as well as the frequency with which Yuya learned the same lesson over and over and over again. Not to mention the infamous now deleted tweets from animator Maiko Abe complaining about the assumedly unhealthy production cycle Arc 5 faced. There seemed to be an absolute garbage fire going on behind the scenes in Arc 5's production, but unfortunately because of how many layers there are to Yu-Gi-Oh's corporate branches, we may never know all the details. What we do know is that this seemingly unhealthy production cycle resulted in some of the worst anime ratings ever posted to Nico Nico Doga, with Arc 5 at one point boasting 9 of the 10 lowest rated anime episodes of all time on the site. So we recognize that Arc 5 had faults in both the show itself and its production. While there's really not much we can do about the production, the question remains, theoretically, how would one fix the Synchro arc's issues? Like, why does Reiji have to stay in captivity for almost the entirety of the arc? Maybe he talks the council into helping him overthrow Roger instead of the council being wishy-washy fence-sitters who at one point debate if they should help Roger instead of Reiji. And if you really need someone to act as the big bad for the arc, why does there have to be the insanely obnoxious will they, won't they between the council and Roger? Just have Roger overthrow them and start ruling city under his fist instead of having the council sit back with Reiji while they do nothing for like 15 episodes. Also, why do we even have to have linear progression through the dimensions in the first place? Why can't the Lancers go back and forth between the dimensions instead of having a fixed destination of Synchro to Xyz to Fusion? For example, once Dennis reveals his true self, maybe the Lancers go to the Fusion dimension to chase him down, only to be met with resistance from, hey, look who it is, Sora! Maybe Sora can figure out here that what Academia wants him to do is unforgivable, instead of his sudden realization that he now dislikes Academia for some reason, happening almost out of nowhere after the viewer hasn't seen him for somewhere around 30 to 40 episodes. Not only would this fix idiotic character writing, the pacing would just feel so much more organic, and the Lancers would have more time together as a group. There's so much more room for improvement with the Synchro arc, and it's just unfortunate that it ended up the way that it did. Arc 5 started with a flashy, brilliant bang, and ended with a sad, weird little whimper. Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to support, feel free to donate to my Ko-fi. The link to it's down below, along with some other links to some really interesting writings about the Synchro arc. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitch and Twitter for all Noah Jank related updates. In the meantime, keep your game on.